So without further ado, let me introduce you to Julianne Kelly, who is the coordinator, Health Department in the city of Fall River. Julie's here to talk to us about Mass in Motion. Mass in Motion is an initiative, obviously, throughout the state, Mass. And she's here to explain to us the good, the bad, the ugly of how they got to where they are in implementing Mass in Motion of Fall River.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you all. It's great to be here. Mass in Motion is the governor's initiative to reduce childhood obesity by working with municipalities to increase access to healthy foods and resources for active living. So parks, sidewalks, bike paths, that kind of thing. It started 4 years ago. The first 10 communities were selected as Mass in Motion communities. 8 of them started with a year of planning, and 2 were started as implementation grants, cities that would begin to roll out immediately. Fall River and Everett were those 2 communities, and in terms of Fall River, based on the work of Dave Weed and Healthy City Fall River, Partners for a Healthier Community, the CHNA. The focus has been on both food, access to healthy food, and on infrastructure in the city. And I'm going to focus this on infrastructure. Much work had been done prior to my starting on access to healthy foods in Fall River. There were already several farmers markets. Marcia, apparently you know Marcia, Ricard was working with Children in Balance, a grant through Tufts University, and had gotten the school system to change the food selections for the kids. So there's a lot of work to go that was already going on. Mass in Motion did get involved, but I will talk about that later if we have time. And in looking at the infrastructure of Fall River, I've been very familiar with the Emerald Necklace up in Boston, and had to come to define Fall River as having the asphalt necklace. That back in the 60s, 3 highways, Route 195 cut right through the center of the city, right over the Wickersham River. Route 79 cut off the population from the waterfront, the wild and scenic Taunton River. So that was impossible to get to, except by car. You could get everywhere by car. And thirdly, Route 24, running south to north, cutting off the population from half of Fall River is part of the southeastern Massachusetts Bioreserve. Half of Fall River is woodland. And not a whole lot of people know that. I didn't know that for years of working in Fall River. So that is an enormous, extraordinary resource, but the population primarily, which is, it's a mile away, is cut off by a major highway. And my experience has always been that you need advocates. To change anything, you've got to have a force that's moving the political will, moving the steps forward. We had to certainly engage the administration and engage like-minded organizations. And so right in the beginning, this was still 2009, the Trustees of Reservations, which is a statewide organization that's over 100 years old, had sort of looked at what they were doing in terms of preserving beautiful properties across the state and decided to return to the founders' original idea of preserving urban open space. And so they turned to the cities where they had already a presence, and Fall River was one of those places. And so the trustees came down to talk about an urban park initiative. And Fall River Park Advocates was begun at that time. Sandy Dennis, a local activist and great volunteer, got involved. And the idea was to really to reposition parks as essential to the public health, to quality of life in the city. And to do that, you need to have some actions. So we started out with yearly citywide park cleanups, and the mayor got very involved with that, and now we have over 200 volunteers, 300 volunteers showing up. An Adopt a Park initiative where neighborhood groups or organizations such as in Fall River People Incorporated could adopt a park and on a more regular basis care for that park. We started a Facebook page in order to communicate out with the public and also to advocate for the parks before the powers that be, before city council, before funding agencies. So we have hundreds of people volunteering, adopting a park. 12 parks have been adopted currently in Fall River. There are 26, so we've got a long way to go, but and these, there are tree plantings, there are maintenance issues like painting the benches, there are beautiful murals that have been designed and implemented on park walls. And then we also have this example of the Pulaski Park Neighborhood Association who adopted their park going before City Hall and also the Community Development Block Grant hearings to make the case to refurbish the playground and the park. And they indeed won a grant to accomplish that, worked with the city to redo the park, and it was the beginning of a process of changing the way the city was relating to the neighborhood groups in terms of beautifying the city, beautifying parks that were used. As one woman who came to one of the city council hearings said, and she was an older woman, so she was speaking about her childhood, she said, when I was a kid, North Park was my backyard. So in such a densely populated city as Fall River and maybe Taunton also, the parks become the backyards, they become the stay vacation sites for the low-income population that we have. Out of Fall River Park Advocates came a subcommittee, which is now called Fall River, the Fall River Bicycle Committee. That has become very active with bike rides almost every week or more during the good weather. Also, Recycle a Bicycle at Durfee High School, where bicycles donated by the police department were brought to Durfee, and as part of a physics class, kids were taught physics, and then the applied part was fixing up bicycles, which then they could earn. So that was very exciting. Again, trips, through the bioreserve and down to the waterfront, so reclaiming Fall River. And also the South Coast Bikeway was developed. And how this occurred was that New Bedford was another mass in motion community. And so we decided that we should have a joint bicycle event connecting the two cities that are only 11 or 12 miles apart. And so to have a contingent start from each city and meet in the middle in Dartmouth. And we did that on a pretty blustery November day in 2010. Had about 70 people show up, very surprising. We engaged the police departments and boards of selectmen and the mayors right across the 4 communities. And so we had a police escort as we did this ride. The following spring, we had another ride this way, connecting the two cities again, only going the southern route and meeting at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And that led to, okay, these are great, but what else can we be doing? And so the first bicycle summit was held in February of 2011. By now, we had engaged Sept and the University of Massachusetts, and over 100 people came to this first bicycle summit. So people came out because it was offered and because they were seeing an interest from their own communities. Ed Lambert, who, former mayor of Fall River, had just been made the commissioner of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and he came to that meeting. In the middle there is Adam Recchia from Sept up here in Taunton, and he is showing a route that would connect from Swansea to Wareham. So now we're going beyond, we're going really regional to the south coast and connecting all of those communities with even a greater vision from Providence to Provincetown. So we think big and get people behind it, and it can happen. So we've had these regional bicycle summits every year, and this last one in the fall, in the spring, we had Bill Strauss, who represents Mattapoisett and Fairhaven, and up at the State House, and also was chair of the Transportation Commission. And so we had him come to speak, and prior to that, we had met with him separately to say that the Department of Transportation was putting a wall up about our idea of using a railroad that is still in use, but sort of not largely used, connecting Fall River to New Bedford, to use that as a rail with trail. Not exactly a rail trail where the rail is actually abandoned and is used for the route, but rail with trail. And the DOT was coming down, doing their kind of regional meetings and saying, oh no, too dangerous, we're not going to go that route. DOT does not support that idea whatsoever, in spite of the proof that we could give, particularly of Rhode Island, that has a rail with trail in the Blackstone River bike path. So when we met with Bill Strauss, he said, what? That just doesn't make sense. He said, I talked to Secretary Davies on a regular basis, so I'm going to sit down with him and see what's going on. Well, at this bicycle summit that we had at the UMass Law School in the spring, Bill Strauss was there, and at that moment he presented a letter from Secretary Davies saying that he had reconsidered the DOT policy and was allowing these rail with trails to occur on a case-by-case basis. So each one would be studied for the safety issues, for what the planning issues were, and so there we see that this effort and this advocacy actually led to policy change on a statewide basis. So that was great success for all of these bicycle committees. These groups meet monthly themselves. There's a committee in Fall River right through Wareham, and then we meet as a group and organize these other events with the idea of progressing on this bikeway. So the second facet was now, we've engaged the public. Those are our advocates. We also have to engage the city administration. So this was back in 2010 that the Urban Conservation Council came down to speak to all the city department heads. They represent the city of Lawrence, Groundwork Lawrence, the city of Lowell, and the city of Worcester. And they made amazing presentations on what had been happening in terms of open space, parks, and woodlands in those three communities. Extraordinary. And our wonderful representation of city department heads, and we have here the water department, the city forester, the city grant writer, the police chief, and the head of the special operations unit, and many others, economic development, planning, the neighborhood liaison, all at the table to hear their presentation. And then to go on a trolley ride around Fall River to see these sites and to talk about the possibilities. One key thing, and it sounds like your mayor is right on board with all of this, that's what I understand from Deb. Well, that absolutely is key, is where your mayor stands. Is he with you? Is he wholeheartedly with you? Or, what kind of support are you going to get from the highest level? And then that will certainly filter down. So we had Nicole Friedman, the bike czar from Boston, come down to speak in 2012. Mayor Flanagan and Dave Dennis, one of the city councilors, were there to lend their support. City Council has gone on to vote in favor of 2 bike lane routes or bike routes through the city of Fall River. So they are in support of what we are doing. We have advocated to get Plymouth Avenue a major thoroughfare, which is being reconstructed by the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation has in its regulations that when they redo a street, they have to accommodate the pedestrian population and bicycle routes. And yet, in this planning process, there were no bicycle lanes. And if the bicycle committee and Mass in Motion were not sitting in that audience of about 6 at a public hearing, there would still be no bicycle lanes. But we asked about it. We asked about the law that required that. We pushed on it, and now that street it's a 2-year project, but when it's completed next year, there will be the north-south bicycle lane route in Fall River, through the heart of Fall River. We have the police department here doing bicycle safety, bicycle helmet giveaway. We have a ride to school day at one of the schools in Fall River, part of Safe Routes to School, so that's another partnership. And here's the street striping beginning on the crosswalks and then later on the bike paths. So it's really engaging everyone, having those relationships with the various members of the city department heads and key players is essential. I would say for this to be, a process that moves, I wouldn't say quickly, because anything in government works pretty slowly, but you see that you're making some progress, and those relationships really, really pay off. So, and again, so this is just that list of, we're talking to Deb about when the water mains are changed. A lot of the cities have such old pipes, sewer and water, or in Fall River there's the combined sewer overflow problem when we have heavy rains. So the water department is a key player in these kinds of changes. The planning department, again, getting the engineer engaged. I was very fortunate that the mayor back in 2010 appointed me to be the coordinator for or chair for the Open Space and Recreation Plan. Cities, in order to apply for state grants through the Department of Conservation, through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and these are park grants and land grants, has to have an up-to-date open space and recreation plan. So ours had expired in 2009. There was a deadline to get a new application in, and the head of the planning department was on maternity leave. So I was selected, knowing very little, next to nothing about this process, but began to work again with department heads and a couple of volunteers. And the good thing about having the Mass in Motion vision at the table, along with a couple of the volunteers, was to really have a vision of the way you want the city to appear. And since our time frame to get this plan into the executive office, there was a sense among more of the department heads to, well, let's just kind of roll this over, let's update it a little bit. But with the help of a visionary, Al Lima, who's a retired city planner, we were able to look at the entire picture of previous ideas for improving the city and put them in the plan. And so here's the public hearing where people came to ask questions, give suggestions. The city, the park board, and DPW were there. And here's Al Lima explaining the plan. The main thing that came out of that plan was the Wickersham River Rail Trail. Again, it was not a brand new idea by any means. As a matter of fact, the state had been down maybe 6 years before looking at the urban river restorations. And so a plan was begun to be developed, but by putting it into the open space and recreation plan, the state sat up and took notice, came down, and now we are about to see the construction of this boardwalk right through the middle of the city, right along the Wickersham River. Should be beginning in the spring. And the DOT, it's on the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan for 2014. So construction on both aspects of it should begin within the next 12 months. So we're really excited about this. And this goes right through the heart of Fall River, so it will be a walking and bicycle path for, the neighborhoods who are really pretty bereft of recreational resources. To be able to go to your doctor at Health First, the community health center, and get a prescription to do some walking and walk out the back door of the center and get on the pathway and just walk and have these beautiful views and beautiful wildlife. It's really a restoration project that will change the city. People coming by and looking over the highway, Route 195, and seeing this laid out, economic development, so many things will can turn around because of this project. Again, we have access to these other major natural resources, the Taunton River and the bioreserve. And as construction is beginning on taking down what they call the spaghetti ramps of the Braga Bridge and rethinking Route 79, there is a large group of advocates who have put themselves on those committees and go to all those meetings. And I have seen them take a step back and say, okay, we are going to have to put bicycle lanes, pedestrian crossings into into these plans. Well, the plans right now are not up to par. We're going to put that in the RFP for the companies that are going to bid for the project. So that advocacy is just so essential, and it pushes the city forward. I can remember with this Plymouth Avenue when we were pushing for the bicycle pathways, the planner coming down to my office and saying, how much are you going to push this? And, I said, well, that's my job. And he said, well, there's a risk that we can lose the money. We need to go forward on schedule. So there is that, constraint, that kind of, you're trying to meet everyone's needs, but push forward at the same time. And when you have the public pushing forward behind you, there's that really makes a huge difference. And finally, engaging other partners. We've been very fortunate to have the trustees, again, Trustees of Reservations, has a youth conservation corps. We've picked out this Cook Pond in the south end of the city. It has the highest obesity rate, the south end. It also has the fewest recreation opportunities. And bringing these teenagers in who are paid employees of the trustees and basically are creating a pathway slowly but surely around the city, around the pond. It'll be 3.5 miles around when it is complete, and it means working with all of the different owners, the National Guard, National Grid, School Department, Housing Authority, all of them around the edges, not to mention more private owners. So, again, demonstrating junk being removed, trees being tagged, neighborhood associations greeting the mayor. And I want to end on this note because you may know, I don't know, is Taunton have the CPA, the Community Preservation Act?
I don't know.
Well, Fall River, it was sort of a spoken anyway, that the CPA would never go through because it's thought of as an additional tax. Well, it's a very small tax. I don't even think it's called a tax. But the way it works is that if a city adopts the Community Preservation Act, every property owner agrees to pay a small tax. It might be as little as $10 on their property taxes, or a certain percentage, say 1% might be that. But in a city such as Fall River, any word of taxes, the hackles go up. No one is going to vote in favor of that. Well, a group of advocates got out there, went neighborhood to neighborhood, went radio and television, went on the Herald News, and amazingly, last November, the Community Preservation Act passed. Now, the Community Preservation Act, that bit of some money is put in by the city itself, and then it is matched. It used to be 100% matched by the state. Now, I think it's around 25%. I don't know if anybody knows that number, but it's not as great as it was. But nonetheless, if you've raised, $50,000, then you're going to have another 15 or whatever number of additional dollars coming down from the state. And that can be used for preservation, parks and open space, and housing, new housing. So it has limited uses. And as I spoke to the advocates that got this, that went talking from door to door and every other which way, again, it was Al Lima, and he said, Mass in Motion created the momentum, changed the ideas that parks and open spaces were quality of life issues, and made that real for the residents of Fall River so that they saw the value of this, and in spite of the fact that it was additional cash from their pockets, they voted for it across the board. It won in every voting district in Fall River. So again, a big policy change. Not brought out by Mass in Motion, its little office in City Hall, but rather by, you know, the volume of people who have been engaged in one way or another. So that's my presentation on the infrastructure piece. So thank you very much.